everybody. Good morning. Hey, we've all had a coffee. You actually responded back to me. That's amazing. I appreciate that. Let's give a round of applause for everybody that makes an ANYCON available or possible, because I'll tell you, running a conference is no easy task, and having as many folks as you have here today in an awesome venue. Let's give a round of applause to everybody that made this possible. I remember when we first started DerbyCon, it was one of those, and by the way, apologies for the ticket sales stuff if anybody went through that whole debacle, but you can still tell we have no idea what we're doing in a lot of cases. But when we started DerbyCon our first year, it was one of those things where you're like, hey, we actually need sound. I didn't think about that. Or we need video cables or things like that. But luckily we have Adrian over there helping out, and I think we've gone through like 6 or 7 different video recording rigs because you keep changing them out. But we figure out what we do year after year. So what I'm here to talk about today is really about the industry and how it's changing, but more so around what we need to do. My whole career has been focused on the offensive side of things. Breaking into things and smashing and grabbing and high-fiving and getting DA and coming up with new exploitation techniques. But as we've grown as an industry, that's changed quite a bit, and a lot of my focus now has been on the defense. And that's important because it's made me a stronger tester on the offensive side by understanding what folks do on the defensive side. And it's a continual bar raising. I think this industry is getting a lot better with what we're dealing with, but the bar keeps getting moved up and up and up. Granted, we still have places where you can not so good, but we'll talk a little about that and what we need to do as an industry to kind of move forward. And I'll give you some tips on the defensive side that I've learned that work very well with really strengthening what's happening out there. Just a brief intro of myself. I started off my career working for the intelligence community, doing more cryptography breaking and signals intelligence for the Marine Corps. I spent about a year in Iraq. I spent another 6 months in Bahrain and Afghanistan, and so doing a lot of forensics and signals collection and things like that over there. And I got out and had no idea what I was doing. I was a kid just out of the military, and started with a small consulting shop. And then I ended up landing a gig being the chief security officer for a Fortune 1000 company, Diebold. And so I came in after the voting machines. I just want to throw that out there. That was after. But it was interesting, when I was a consultant, I'd go in and I'd break into these companies, and it would take me, it was always a goal for me. I wanted to get it faster and faster and faster. I think my record for domain admin was like 5.5 minutes or something like that. I wrote a tool called Fast Track back in the day where I plugged it in and literally just hacked they had a DC that had a weak SQL password on it, and I was able to compromise it in like, 3 minutes, 13 seconds or something like that. So that was my record. And so I was super happy about that because, I was like, the fastest one in the company, and I never understood why companies couldn't actually go and understand why this was a problem or understand why they could fix it. And then I became a chief security officer for a Fortune 1000 company, and I realized that hey, business actually has to operate, and you can't just start changing things on the fly. And our company at Diebold decided to stop patching for 2 years because they didn't want to impact the business. Now that changed substantially. Really good program there nowadays. But it was interesting to see that. And then, I had a perfectly great job, working as a chief security officer. I was one of the youngest VPs in Diebold history. And I just decided one day that it wasn't the right thing for me, and I wanted to start my own companies. And it was good timing too, because my wife was just pregnant with twins. So, leaving and doing a startup where you don't know if you're going to have any money or not, in the basement of your house is a really good time to start a company. And, so my wife is awesome and supported me. And I started Trusted Sec and Binary Defense. Trusted Sec is a consulting company, and I get to, what's great about that is I get to hire all my friends and family to basically go and do stuff that we do really good stuff with on the consulting side. And then Binary Defense is a monitoring detection company, managed security operations center, where we have a 24/7 SOC and all that good stuff. But what's cool about that is we have a agent that we put out to our customers, and it's been fun building that out and actually having developers that can really do code, because my code is literally hey, if it works, it's good. So I'll spend 3 hours at night coding something, give it to them, and kind of moving from there. But I've been fortunate. I started a conference with a lot of my friends, DerbyCon. I help with the TV show Mr. Robot. So a couple of the skits that you've seen out there on the Mr. Robot show I've helped with. What's also fun is wait for season 3. It's going to be super cool. And then a lot of the stuff on the news, CNN, Fox, and all that other things. I'm also one of the sexiest men alive. I always like using this one. If you haven't seen it before, I was on the Katie Couric show, but I was a lot heavier then. That's Big Dave, and I'm Little Dave. Was it 2 years ago, Katie Couric, I was on the Katie Couric show, and I hacked into some lady and hacked her computer and was monitoring her house and everything on TV. And when I did it, they said, coming up next, one of the world's sexiest men alive, and it was Benedict Cumberbatch from Sherlock, but they removed the up next piece for a second and had my face there. So, I'm keeping it. So, if you look at our industry, from 10 years ago to 15 years ago, we are getting better. And I truly believe that. I believe it's harder for us as attackers, to get into a lot of different companies. Now, that's not a blanket exception. There are companies out there that have a lot of issues when it comes to security. But as an industry as a whole, I believe we're getting better because the techniques that I have to do, the techniques that I have to leverage, I have to keep upping my game, to get into these companies. I have to use, app bypass techniques. I have to use ways of manipulating how my traffic's looking. I have to go to RFC, compliant protocols like HTTPS and use legitimate traffic. I have to do things now that are much different than what I had to do 10 years ago. And it's happened very quickly. I would say probably over the past 5 to 6 years, we've taken some evolutionary jumps into how we're defending our networks. Now, again, it's not great all across the board, but there's a lot of promise in this industry, around getting better. And that's really because of you. I remember going to DEF CON 9, and there was 150 people at Alexis Park, and it's a bunch of folks just kind of talking around a pool. And now we have, 20,000 people at DEF CON. This industry is filled with so many different brilliant people that are trying to do different things, and figuring out different ways of just hacking around to get better at what we do on defense. And it's interesting because, we used to use, 10 years ago, fear, right? Fear was our big driver for getting permission because we didn't have the data that we had today. We didn't have WannaCry happening in the news and our CEO coming down saying, hey, how does this impact our business? We had to be like, hey, how many times have we heard Target, right? We've used Target for that was like 10 years ago, wasn't it? Or 8 years ago or 7 years ago. And we still use that, every single time. So we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to use fear because I think if you look at the industry, we get it. We understand that as part of doing business and as part of doing IT and if you do technology, security has to be a part of that. Now, we might debate on the percentages that we need for funding or what we need to allocate and what's our return on investment and how do we get metrics around that to actually show our return. Those are all things that we're still getting mature with in our industry. But in most cases, we don't have to argue that fight anymore. We know that as part of doing business, as part of doing IT, security is now an industry that we need to focus on to get better at with what we're doing. If you look at the people, I've got to meet some of the most brilliant people out there, and we all work off of each other. We've created a firestorm of what we're dealing with today because one person will release, some proof of concept code, and then the industry takes it and makes it into a full-fledged way of actually doing something. And we all learn off of each other. If you look at me, I remember sitting in the IRC chat rooms, on remote exploit when Mutz and the guys that before they started offensive security, asking in the chat room, hey, what's the first programming language I should learn? Oh, you should learn Python. And then they helped me groom to me where I'm at today. So we learn off of each other and we're like sponges. And it's really making this industry a lot better based on the collaboration that we have, people coming up and speaking. And I always hear, people talking about hey, I don't want to submit at DerbyCon because my stuff isn't good enough. That's not the case at all. If you've done something, your unique experience makes that a unique experience for you to be able to present that. And hopefully, people can take that over and make it better, as we go along. But the truth of the matter is we need to do better. We see a lot of attacks happening. We see a lot of things happening where we can't keep up with the pace of what's happening in the research market, in the industry itself, the underground market, and what we see kind of happening across the news. So there's a lot for us to do better with. And for me, this is kind of my mentality of how I think. Do something today that your future self will thank you for. And so for me, InfoSec is much more than just a job. It's something where I like to focus on and go home. It's funny because my kids go to bed at 8:30 or 9. I have a 9-year-old and twins that are 6. They go to bed at 8:30 or 9-ish, if I'm lucky. And then, my wife will go up and watch Judge Judy or something like that, whatever she watches. And then I'll go program for a few hours. And that's my release and that's my time that I get to, reflex my brain and everything else. And I like doing that, as part of not just a job, but having fun with what I'm doing. And so we have the ability to change things for the better, and we're already doing it. You're looking at medical devices that had security issues, and now they're building security into that, kind of. We have voting machines, hopefully, that kind of. We're getting there, right? We have a lot of work to do. Cars, kind of, right? We have a lot of things that we have to get better at as an industry, but they're at least talking about what we need to do from security. I mean, the fact that we have people on TV that are actually security people talking about things is an absolute amazing thing, instead of, an anchor talking about what WannaCry is and things like that. And so, you look at this industry, we have a lot of work to do, and everybody's a part of what that means. And so that comes from making it better. It comes from us learning from each and every one of us. And what's great about this industry, and I'll show you a video here. This is one thing that Jason Street did. And if you haven't seen it, it's the National Geographic Breakthrough. Was a really good series that Jason did about hacking into a bank and kind of showing what's happening out there. I think Jason puts it well of, listen, he's not an expert in everything. I'm not an expert in everything. But there's somebody in this industry that is. There's somebody in this industry that's really awesome at what they do and is especially unique at what they do. Let's leverage that to be able to go and do what we can. So here's a clip from Breakthrough that I thought was really cool.
With over 20,000 hackers in one place, DEF CON's the perfect venue for them.
I like how they have the deep voice, by the way. It's like all scary.
Hack in Beirut, Lebanon.
I mean, what's up? I thought you could break into anywhere. You couldn't even get in our hotel door.
Screw you, man. Screw you. The beauty of this community is that I don't know all this in this one field, but I've got a friend who does.
So what do you need? What do you want?
Looks like a total drug deal, by the way.
And, we're going all the way, so we're going to do the full penetration testing, everything, and full social engineering.
Well, good news is I have an unpublished version of the social engineering toolkit where I just rewrote all the PowerShell injection techniques. I had a new one I did recently with it. So security guards, have their phones next to them.
Right.
So I spoofed a text message to the security guard, letting him know that there was an issue outside. He went outside, and then I broke into the building that way. So it works really well. So it's great.
It was funny. I was just at a conference called ANYCON, which is a thing put on by CNBC. And it's not a security conference at all. It's talking to business people. And one of the things that I like doing, which is a really neat trick, is calling somebody up on stage. It's like, you want to kind of present that you're a magician, that you can do cool things on stage when it comes to non-tech folks. And so one thing I'll usually do is I'll come up on stage and I'll grab their first and last name. And then from there, I have a technique where I can grab their social security number, their date of birth, their home address, all that, their phone numbers and all that. And I could do it within about 30 seconds or so. So I had this lady come up on stage and I just asked for her first and last name. And she happened to be Russian, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I can pull Russian information, but she was a U.S. citizen, luckily, so I was able to pull her info. And so I grabbed all her info and I gave her her social security number. I showed it to her on stage. I didn't actually say her social security up on there, but I said, hey, are you 28 years old? She's like, yep, I'm 28. I'm like, you were born here. Yep. And she's like, so she started freaking out. She clammed up a little bit. I'm like, well, what's your phone number? I'm like, here's your phone number, right? And she's like, yeah, that's my cell phone. I'm like, do you have it with you? And she pulls it out, and I spoofed a number from her dad saying, hey, I'm in the hospital. Can you call me? And she looked at it and she looks at me and I'm like, that's just me. Don't worry. And so, that type of stuff is cool, obviously from a magic perspective, because, it shocks the whole audience. And I think I scared everybody there, but, actually I did scare everybody there.
It's sweet and scary. What's up, dude?
Of all the hackers here, few know tech better.
So a funny story about this one, they're recording, they didn't show this. I hope it comes in the bloopers or outtakes. But when Darren came up, Darren and I are good friends, and so I went to give Darren a hug. And Darren was laughing, and he gave me a hug, and his tooth cut me right here. And so I had blood dripping down the side of my face. It was really bad. It was a huge gash that was dripping blood everywhere. So it took 15 minutes for the blood to stop. And so now the whole joke is Darren's a vampire. And so if you look closely in the video, you'll actually see a gash on the side of my face, where Darren basically bit me in the eye.
Darren Kitchen.
We know you have some new stuff that's coming out.
He's patented one of the most potent devices now in use, and brought several that aren't even on the market yet.
So if you need to do any wireless on this engagement, this guy, Pineapple. Actually, it's on right now. My phone's connected to it. Check this out.
So someone's already
turn off your Wi-Fi.
Everybody turn off everything now.
Don't do anything to you guys. But yeah, check this out. So we've got basically everyone in the vicinity.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
So basically, man, this is a malicious access point.
Think about it from this factor. People go to Starbucks all the time. They go to hotels.
Right.
When they join those networks, your computer records those settings. So next time you power your computer on, it's like, hey, is Starbucks here? Hey, is this hotel here? And that intercepts that and says, yep, I'm Starbucks, connect to me.
So if I was a bang guy.
So that was a fun one. It was cool to be able to do something like that for National Geographic, because they actually followed Jason around. And if you haven't seen it, it's a National Geographic's breakthrough. And they actually go and break into a bank. And it's funny because Jason, walks into a bank, and he actually, just no credentials whatsoever. He asks the tellers behind, he's like, hey, I need to plug a USB device in here because I'm doing an audit. And she's like, well, I'm really busy right now. He's like, no, it'll only take a second. Can you please move? And the lady moves, and, he compromises the machine, and he goes to the next one, and goes to the next one, he goes to the next machine, he goes into the back office, he's plugging in USB devices everywhere, no one knows what's going on, and he just walks out all smiling. And this is in Lebanon, by the way, so he's like the only, American there, it's interesting what you can actually go and get away with, when you have some level of confidence, and obviously Jason and Khalil are some of the best. So, that's a good one around, this industry. If you need something, Jason may not be the best at PowerShell. He's absolutely fantastic at social engineering and breaking in. Who do you go to when you need some, bypass technique to get around next gen AV or something like that? You go to your friends, that have the ability to go and do that for you. So as an industry, what we look at, and this is where it took me a lot of maturity in my career, is that offense isn't always the best answer to things. I'd go into a company every single year, and I'd break in, and I'd high-five myself, and then I'd walk out. And then they'd fix the technical findings, and then the next year I'd go in, I'd break in again, and then I'd walk out and high-five myself, and then I'd come in. And then I do, it's a cyclical effect, right? And the companies can never realize why I was able to break in when they fixed the findings that I did. And obviously, if we're on the offensive side, we know that fixing just technical findings doesn't fix the actual issues around the security program or what's actually happening, or even the detection around what we're doing, as attackers. And so I started to learn more about, on the defensive side, what are things that we can do, to make things a lot better out there. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So understanding offense makes defense better, and understanding defense makes offense better. There's some cool things that I've been able to do. Like, I was at a customer, and they had carbon black in place. And, carbon black, if you build it out over time, can be a very good product for visibility and detection, if you implement it correctly. And one thing that they did is they had encoded command variations for PowerShell detected very well. So they had, -E, -EC, -EN, -ENCO. Still very much a whitelist approach to detecting PowerShell. I would actually detect PowerShell more on length size than I would any specific commands. But if you look at PowerShell specifically, there's 12 different variations of encoded commands. So I had to come up with a new technique to get around their specific PowerShell detection. And so I figured out a way of being able to leverage encoded command without ever calling PowerShell. And that was the two-string variation, which basically converts my commands to a string eventually once I assemble it, and that got around their watch list. So as an attacker, I had to up my game to get around their detection criteria to become better with what I was doing. And that's awesome. I love doing that. I love working my brain to figure out a way to get around something that they built in. And so if you look at solid layers of security, protection, for me, if you look at a good program, and what actually trips me up is having a good base level of protection. I'll talk a little about that. Detection, so actually going and detecting what we're doing. And I think the industry right now is really focused on that detection piece, which is fantastic. And that's why I see a lot of, app whitelisting techniques coming out. I'll talk about that as well. And then deception, building things on top of your network that are enticing to me as an attacker. And I'll talk about some things that you can do today, to build some of those in, which is really awesome. And so if you look at methods of detection, it's becoming increasingly difficult because, guys like SubT and those guys are creating new bypass techniques for legitimate Windows executables that come out that we're not looking for. Like, is your program designed to look for RegSVR32 or CBD, or, WinDebug or any other ones that can actually get remote code execution without actually dropping executables onto the operating system? Most of us will say no, because we are still working on executables. Like today, we're still worried about ransomware, which, if you look at ransomware, it's the same type of hacking that I did back in the 90s in AOL. It's dropping executables that aren't signed by getting users to click on something, right? Whether it's a Word document or something else. And the Word document may use PowerShell, but it's still just a base downloader for an executable in the first place. And so you look at these techniques, we're still struggling with a lot of the basic concepts because we get in that cyclical effect of things around, hey, we need to stop, all these other crazy, hacks. We're not even stopping the basic stuff. And so let's look at a case study real quick on the Eternal Blue and Double Pulsar aspect. So our program's already been close to handling the zero-day angle, right? I mean, we're not even at a point because, hey, the techniques that a nation state was using, i.e. us, was, essentially undetectable, right? So we had a exploit that wasn't published. It was in a experimental part of the code of SME version 1 called Cairo that triggered a exploit that allowed you to get full access to the machine without ever touching disk, right? Kernel exploitation, undetectable. But if you look at what happened with Eternal Blue, things like Emmet that they came out with, or even Windows 10 protections, at the time that Eternal Blue was stolen in 2013, Windows 10 hadn't even come out yet, but we've already ported it to Windows 10 and everything else. So all versions of Windows were vulnerable to this specific attack that was out there. So all of our methods of preventing this did not help us, and so now that whole part of detection starts to come into play. I don't know if you know, but right now with Windows logs, you can look at abnormal patterns of behavior like lateral movement very easily. So if you just grab your event logs, and most of us aren't getting event logs from our workstations in the first place. There's some event logs that are really relevant. So Windows Event Forwarding or something like that, you can push it to your SIM or whatnot. But if you look for event log 4624 with the same source IP address, successfully logged in, network login type 3, which means, you're logging in through the network, and you have a key length of 0, which means a lower level protocol like SMB or RPC, you can detect lateral movement in your environment. And so, if we had used something like Eternal Blue or Double Pulsar had been used on our network, and it got compromised, we didn't detect it, well, the NSA still needs to move to the systems that they want to target, whether it's the data or the servers, they still need to move from one machine that they either social engineered, to get access into or directly exploited, and then to move out to other systems to get access. You would have hit them on the lateral movement piece because it would have been an account that you would have never seen moving from somebody in HR or sales going to other systems on the network. And so those detection pieces around behavior is really important. And so let's talk about protection, real quick here. It's one of my favorite slides. I never got the talk for some reason. I don't know why. But we have a lot of stuff going on protection right now. And this industry is really focused on protection. And that's good, because we want to stop everything. But I think as an industry, we recognize that protection isn't always going to work, right? There's always going to be something that happens where our protection capabilities, regardless of what they are, whether it's traditional antivirus or next generation stuff, isn't going to detect or actually prevent what we're actively going and doing. And so if you look at a lot of these newer tools, you can just stop a service, or you can just rename PowerShell, or you can just not use a Packer, and get around a lot of the traditional next generation products out there. A good example is with Cylance specifically. You can just rename PowerShell.exe to moo.exe, and then you're all set. You have nothing to worry about, right? Or you can just stop the service, and then you're all right as well. So, we know that things aren't going to actually work 100% of the time, whether the technology is good or not. We are going to have issues on the protection side. Now, when it comes to next generation stuff, I still, to this day, do not see things like machine learning or artificial intelligence actively working to stop us. And I think in about 5 or 10 years, it'll be something that is absolutely used. But the interesting part is that when it comes to humans, if we just had computers that were very predictable in everything that we did, and then we look for deviations of patterns in that, it'd be a completely different story. But we have this thing called human beings where we're very unpredictable in nature. One day we won't click a fish, and the next day we will click a fish, based on how that fish is used. And so machine learning and artificial intelligence becomes extremely difficult from a false positive perspective to be able to roll that out substantially across the board. And so if you look at where we're at today on a lot of the next generation product lines, it's not something that is actively stopping us as attackers. It's not something that causes us to raise our bar. The detection stuff is really what starts to get us when we're starting to do more targeted attacks. A lot of this stuff may be good for commoditized things, like, hey, someone's running an old, sub-7 Trojan from 1990. Maybe it'll stop that. That's good. Or maybe not. It just depends. But, when it comes to the human element, that's the main piece. The good news is, I think Barracuda figured out how to stop all data breaches, so we can all go home now. Driving through an airport and saw that. The Cylance ones at Atlanta Airport or O'Hare, man, oh man, stops all the hackers, whatever the heck that is. But, the marketing is getting crazy with this industry. But for me, if you look at protection, I don't think these solutions are the right approach. I think known good is the right approach. I think understanding application whitelisting is a good approach. Like a good example, when everybody says application whitelisting, they start to freak out. Because we've tried it before and it failed, and it's probably been very difficult to implement. There's super easy things that you can do right now in your environment that make it substantially difficult. Like, hey, what is 94% right now of the current attack vectors? What do they leverage as far as like ransomware, commoditized malware? What do they use? What's that method that they use? Well, phishing for sure, absolutely. But what do they do on that machine afterwards? I said it a little bit earlier. Well, lateral movement right after they compromise, but what's the main purpose of like, how do they get code execution on the machines? In EXE, right? Still, they may use WScript, they may use PowerShell, but ultimately they're downloading a executable to run on that machine, right? Now, is a executable in your user's profiles, your downloads directory, temps directories, are those things that you should allow? No. Should you even allow unsigned executables in the first place? No, but sometimes we have these applications and things like that we wrote that suck from like the 1990s, and we still have mainframe code and stuff like that, right? Now, we still have those use cases. But let me just take an example. 94% of the infection rates that we see today come from unsigned executables. So if you take device guard or application whitelisting or app locker, and you just say, hey, block all code signing executables in users' profiles, what does that do? Reduces 94% of the noise, right? So now you have a very easy way of being able to eliminate a lot of noise, and now let's start to focus on some of the cool stuff. And the fact that ransomware is still a problem is a problem, because ransomware is still using techniques that we used 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was, figuring out how to program, back in the day, and probably dressing up like that. Those are things that we find as a problem. Now, what's nice about it, if you implement application control very well, and if you notice, Microsoft's taking a huge stance on it, with Device Guard. Matthew Graber is doing some amazing work. If you're not following Matthew Graber, it's Manifestation on Twitter. He works at Microsoft now, came from FireEye previously to that, and he's been actually pushing Device Guard policies down that are super secure out of the box. Ones that actually take into account, app whitelisting techniques like CBD or, tracker.exe or regsvr32, methods that you can get remote code execution and circumvent application whitelisting, but are out of the box shut down based on those device guard policies. So there are things you can do today to actually stop that and make it much easier. So if your protection goes out the window, what do you focus on next? And this detection piece of it is one of my favorites. This is where I have most of my fun nowadays, is figuring out detection patterns for really complex things. And they're usually really not complex at all. They're usually pretty easy. Now, there's obviously a big movement moving to the cloud. And we do cloud for everything else. In order for me in a security organization to accept cloud, I have to get either the same level of control or security or greater, right? Or visibility, right? Control, visibility, or protection or greater, right? The same or greater. Does everybody agree with that as an industry? We need to have the same controls or greater, right? Because you don't want to lessen your controls and have less security when you move to something like cloud, right? And the whole purpose of going to a cloud is making things easier, right? So hopefully they have better security. Well, interesting enough, I did an assessment on Office 365. And I took a look at what they call their Advanced Threat Protection, ATP. And what was interesting about this is it actually started off as a tiff, I guess is the best way of putting it, on Twitter. So a guy I know, Jose from CNN, had made a comment that like, hey, I just got this shady email, and the unsubscribe link would be cool if you put code in the unsubscribe link, to compromise a machine. And someone responded back to him. I hadn't even seen it. Someone responded back to him and said, hey, Dave's been doing that for years. There's a couple talks that he did on that. And it's funny because I use it all the time. I'll send like 5 or 6 annoying emails about taking a survey. And then as soon as they hit the unsubscribe link, I compromise the machine, right? It's totally evil, right? But it works really well. And so, with that specific technique, I responded back and I said, it works really well. And, an individual from Microsoft, and, this is not a knock on Microsoft at all. They have to deal with a lot, when it comes in. And they have a lot of employees too. This isn't a knock in any way, shape, or form. But one of the guys, from Microsoft said, Microsoft's Advanced Threat Protection would have stopped this. And I responded back, and I actually just gotten off of a assessment where I was taking a look at Advanced Threat Protection, so I knew it inside and out. But I couldn't release any of the information. So I responded back and I said, hey, my understanding, my experience is it maybe would not have stopped this type of attack. It probably, would need a little bit more controls on the endpoints and things like that to actually stop this type of attack, and I wasn't trying to knock him or anything, just being very polite. And the guy responds back, he's like, oh, I see what you're trying to do. You're just trying to rep your crap products. So when something like that happens, you get the whole I've been wronged on the internet, thing, and it was a Friday, and I had whole plans for the weekend, right? I had some friends coming over for dinner, I was taking the kids out to baseball games, all that, all canceled. Got my black hoodie on, right? And so I started taking a look at Advanced Threat Protection and doing my own research that I could use that wasn't outside of the NDA that I was doing for this other company. And so, it's funny because one of my buddies, Dave, that works at Binary, he came over with his wife for dinner, and I totally skipped dinner. I don't eat or anything like that, and he just has a picture of me in my room, like buckled down, in my office, programming and not even acknowledging anybody else is there. And so, I started taking a look at Advanced Threat Protection. And so if you look at ATP, it has two components, what they call their safe attachments and safe links, okay? Now, their safe links is the first thing I took a look at. Now, interesting enough, when you sign up for, when you have an E5 account or above, you're guaranteed to have, ATP as part of that, right? And then it's on top of their traditional, anti-spam stuff. Now, when I took a look at safe links, I started looking at what does it do, and could it protect against, commoditized attacks as well as advanced attacks? You want to see, do I have the same level of security or greater when I move to something like an Office 365 instance, right? And so, interesting enough with safe links, the first thing it does, which I thought was egregious, by the way, is when you get an email, it rewrites the URL, and when you hover over the link, it says Microsoft Safe Links. You don't even see the original URL. So what does that do? What do we teach our users to do? Now, they don't do it anyway, but what do we teach our users to do, right? Hover over the link to make sure it's a legitimate link, right? So now you've taken the end user and awareness piece of it and removed it out of the window, right? It's gone. So you no longer have that. But you could say, okay, well, if I have, the same or greater security controls with that link, and I trust Microsoft explicitly, sorry, I coughed in the middle of that, explicitly, what do we do at that point? And so what I started looking at is, what does safe links actually do to protect the user and the browser and the operating system from these types of attacks? Well, it doesn't do anything really. It has a whitelist and a blacklist of Microsoft sites that it is already predetermined as being malicious, and that's the only thing it does. It doesn't do any dynamic content expansion of websites. Let me repeat that. It does no dynamic content expansion of websites at all. Zero. None. Zip. I was running MS-14-037, which is an IE memory corruption exploit that gets picked up by every antivirus. No problem. Remote code execution is no big deal. HTA droppers. I use old code, old viruses that get picked up in non-pack things, just to see if it even scan executables. No scanning of executables. You can literally drop an exe from the website itself. No issues whatsoever. So there's no security whatsoever on that component, right? And what's interesting is that if you get put on Microsoft's blacklist, you can just submit to get removed, and they remove you within 3 hours. So if you ever on a pen test and you get blacklisted by Microsoft, just go to their site and enter the IP address and say it was an accident, and they will remove that from you within 3 hours. So you're good. I ran into that in a fish one time, right? So those are and by the way, you get whitelisted for a larger period. You can be more egregious after you go through that exception process, which is awesome. So for safe links, it does absolutely nothing as far as security. Zero. Zip. And they may be getting better with that, right? And this isn't, again, not a knock on Microsoft. Think about what they have to do. They have to deal with millions and millions and millions of customers at an extremely large volume. So if you're actually doing dynamic content inspection of all those sites before they're clicking out, think about the infrastructure that they need to have in order to support that. It's substantially huge, massive. And they have an amazing team over there of really brilliant folks that are working on trying to get better. But in this case, it definitely, if you click the unsubscribe link, you definitely would have been compromised. Would not have protected you against that. The second component was safe attachments. Now, the first red flag for me as a business person would have been, when you get an email, it could take anywhere between 15 to 20 minutes to actually get that attachment, because it's doing its analysis. So as a business, you have to wait 15 or 20 minutes. 15 or 20 minutes to get your attachment. So your CEO that got an email, you need to wait 20 minutes or so. So yeah, I'm sure that's fine. I hear they are improving that, by the way, so it's going to go down 5 or 10 minutes, which is a little bit better, right? So when I looked at the safe attachments piece of it, I found that most of the stuff, if you're using common Excel documents with macros enabled with auto open, it would look at that and look and see if there's any code being run in there. But aside from that, it's pretty much Windows Defender signatures that they're going through and piping through it. So very little protection on the safe attachments piece as well. I was able to get through that as well. So to me, is that equal or greater protections moving to a cloud infrastructure? No, I would need to route it through something else first and protect myself first in a different way than using something like that. But there is cool things you can do out of the box that you have available as free that you don't need to buy a next generation product line or anything like that. If you're not familiar with Sysmon, it's made by Sysinternals. It's free. It's awesome. There's actually Swift on Security has a Sysmon config that gives you a lot of details, but it's free from Microsoft. And there's so many things you can detect. You can detect Mimikatz, for example. Mimikatz spawns every time you launch Mimikatz, it imports vaultcli.dll. I mean, it's coming from a process that's not within, Windows or program files. It's probably a good indication that Mimikatz is being actively run in your environments. Recently, Sophos really hated Sysmon, but it crashed boxes. But they just released, as of yesterday, 6.0.3, which so they released 6.0.2 on May 22nd, which fixed the Sophos crashing. but unfortunately they completely removed image load, which is how you detected like almost everything. And so in 6.0.3, which was released yesterday, they fixed all of that, and now it does not crash anything as far as we've been able to tell. But Sysmon is amazing, and you use Sysmon. What it does is it exposes what's called event log tracing, ETW. And there's so many things you can do, like a process created, DLLs imported into memory, process injection. You can determine process injection, SAM extractions, registry keys that are being hit, executables that are being dropped, registry modification. You can tune it to be whatever you want to get you that detection that you need in your environment. It's free. Why is this not installed in every single organization that we go into to get that into your environment to start building a lot of your detection criteria off of? It's really, really good. One of the main methods, I'll show you this in a second. There's the community edition. So if you go to github.com/SwiftOnSecurity, there's a Sysmon config there. And that has a lot of the detection criteria already to be able to do things like Mimikatz detection, hash extractions, even a lot of the application whitelisting bypasses like RegSVR32 and others are up on there. So a really good resource to be able to go and pull that. So shout out to Swift on Security and all the people that have taken that on as part of a community-driven thing. It's awesome. There's a technique that I use all the time, which is NPS or not PowerShell. One of our guys at Trusted Sec, Ben 10, wrote this, and there's other ways of doing it, by the way. But what you can do is you can call system.management.automation.dll and system.management.automation.na.dll. And what you can do is you can actually leverage PowerShell without ever calling PowerShell.exe. And why that's important is a lot of our detection around PowerShell is based off of looking for PowerShell.exe spawning and then looking for indicators in that, right? And by the way, for PowerShell, if you're looking for specific words like encoded command and stuff like that, I would highly recommend switching that to why is PowerShell.exe beating out to the internet? Like that one alone is a good indication, right? Or the length of the commands, like why is someone running 255 character PowerShell command, in my environment? That's not legitimate, right? And most of these tools, by the way, and this isn't a knock on any tools, but most of these tools like Carbon Black and others that do the visibility, as soon as you actually go into PowerShell.exe, you lose all visibility because they're not using script block logging or anything like that to actually identify what's happening behind the scenes and interpreting. So you have large gaps of visibility right now in PowerShell. But what you can do to detect things like non-PowerShell that are calling PowerShell is if you see an executable that's not PowerShell.exe or PowerShell_ISE.exe calling those two, it's probably a good indication that there's something going on there to where you have that being called. Now, there's a couple things that we'll call like the .NET libraries and things like that. We'll call those, so you might have a few false positives at first to tune out, but really it's really easy to detect that. Suspicious processes. Why is MS Build calling out to the internet? Why is RegSVR32 calling out to the internet? By the way, RegSVR32 is probably the new hotness right now, so if you're not looking for RegSVR32, I'd heavily recommend looking for that in your environment. The reason why RegSVR32 is a big deal right now is because it's proxy aware. So it has its own built-in browser and it's proxy aware, and you can literally download what's called STT files from the internet and have it remotely execute code directly. And by the way, just by blocking .sct files doesn't work. It could be any document type. It can be any format type. It doesn't need to be .sct file. So I usually just use .xml or .txts and then download the SCT file directly into memory and then execute and get remote code execution without having to call anything. And so if you see RegSVR32 or CBD or MS Build or RunDL32, I'd highly recommend those. The new, if you take a look at Matthew Graber's recent post that happened like 2 days ago, he released that configuration for Device Guard. It has all of these known bypass techniques built into that policy, and you can just grab those executables. And if you ever see them running in your environment, going out to the internet, that's a good indication that something's actively wrong. So, highly recommend those. Pass the hash detection. Event ID 4624, login type 3, key length 0, and the account NTLM SSP. That's how you detect pass the hash. Really easy. So you can detect pass the hash in your environment. That's one that we actively still use today to go and use. Now, granted, we shouldn't have the same local admin account on every single machine and be able to move laterally that easily, but we still do in a lot of cases. And now with the new version of Mimikatz, they removed, you're familiar with the W-Digest flaw with Mimikatz? Right, so you can inject into LSASS and grab that undocumented feature of W-Digest and extract clear text passwords out of memory. Well, they fixed that in Windows 8.1 and above, but it's just a registry key. So you can either change that registry key from a 0 to a 1 or a 1 to a 0, and then you still get, and then boot them off, and then when they log back in again, you get their username and password and clear. But what's nice about the new version of Mimikatz is now they added support so that even if you don't get the clear text password in memory, you get the LM and NTLM hash from memory itself. So you still get the hash values off of that, and so they didn't really fix the specific issue of that specifically. So you can get the domain so the domain username and password off of that specifically. So a lot of good stuff right there. The thing about detection is it's hard work. We go in most companies, and what they don't understand is the attack side of it, because they're primarily focused on the defensive side of it and putting out fires. And so in order to do what we need to do, we need to first eliminate the noise, right? Known good. Eliminate the noise. Do at least some basic, stuff, and say, hey, we're not going to allow non-code signed executables in, user directories and things like that. And then from there, we can start building out and reducing the noise to build some of the detection stuff. So let me show you some easy bypass techniques real quick. This is an example of Unicorn, which is a tool that I wrote. So if you're not familiar, it's at github.com/trustedsec/unicorn. And what Unicorn is it's a PowerShell exploitation framework. So originally, when PowerShell is becoming awesome, I actually have the first claim to fame for doing the very first security talk of PowerShell ever. It was at DEF CON, I think 16 or 14 or something like that. And it's called PowerShell OMFG. And it was funny because one of the Microsoft reps came into Diebold and it was like, hey, we have this new thing called PowerShell. It's still in very early alpha, but it's going to be like Bash for Windows. And I'm like, oh, that sounds amazing. And so I started looking at the beta release and then started doing a lot of the stuff. So, I think we released a tool called PowerDump, which I thought was pretty funny, to dump the SAM database out of through PowerShell. And then we did a few other ones as well. So this is a demo of Unicorn. And what's nice about Unicorn is when Matthew Graeber came out with a technique to be able to do direct memory injection of PowerShell, and what happened was you need a 64-bit or 32-bit shellcode, and so you wouldn't always know what platform you're on. And so what I did is I started doing some research, and I found out that, hey, within PowerShell, I can query, the operating system and see if I'm in a 64 or 32-bit platform. And if I'm in a 64-bit platform, downgrade my process to a 32-bit process, and then execute my shellcode with native 32-bit shellcode, so I don't have to store both of them and inject one, have it crash, and then inject another and have it work successfully. And so this incorporates what's called the x86 downgrade attack into Unicorn. Now, the newer version of it heavily obfuscates everything, so it never actually calls PowerShell itself. So if you're looking for things like PowerShell or IEX, invoke expression, or encoded command, it's not going to actually go and detect it. So here's one right here. So I'm going to run Unicorn. And any cool hacker tool has to have ASCII art, and so the Unicorn has fiery eyes from it. It was actually funny with the fiery eyes. I was in the middle of teaching at Black Hat, and one of the students was like, "It'd be awesome if his eyes were fiery." And so we went on a break, and by the time he came back, I already had a pull request up to get the fiery eyes in there. But with Unicorn, there's a few different methods you have. You can do macro injection, so it'll actually create a macro that uses PowerShell injection directly into memory through Excel and through macros. So, it never actually touches disk from that perspective, which is really good. And then you can do the CRT method. So there's a way of taking an executable and converting it to base64 and then using certutil, which is Microsoft's, certificate utility. You can convert it back to a binary for you. There's also the macro example and then the PowerShell method as well. So I'm going to go ahead and run Unicorn. And that's getting cut off at the bottom here. So let me, there we go. We'll just use Meterpreter. You can use your own payload if you want to. Spell Meterpreter right. Man, I have coffee. All right, and we're going to generate our payload on our IP address, reverse payload on our IP address, and the port that we're going to come back on. Now, when this code gets generated, it generates two files. One is a unicorn.rc file, so it's a Metasploit RC file. You can just import and automatically create your listener and everything else. If you're not familiar with the reverse HTTPS payload, it's going to get picked up by most antivirus out there based on the second stage. So there's what's called a first stage, second stage. The second stage is usually what gets snagged, and the reason for that is because when Metasploit goes to launch, it uses especially in the reverse HTTPS, it goes in and actually pulls out a binary. So you can actually see the MZ header incident. Now, why is that a problem? Why is a HTTPS site downloading an EXE a problem? Most people don't allow direct EXEs to be downloaded from the internet, right? So what you can do is there's a advanced flag called set enable stage encoding to true, and that will actually encode the second stage, so it's just a mangled binary blob of nothing. There's no binary in there whatsoever, and that'll get around your Palo Altos, your Symantec's, and everything else out there from a second stage perspective. So you don't need to worry about it. So it's just called set enable stage encoding to true. And that will use, so it's using what's called Shikata Gaine, which gets picked up by every antivirus vendor out there. if it's a binary, because it's a predictable binary. But since it's over the network, it's actually not a binary at all. It's just a blob of encoded data that's polymorphic. And so there's no way for them to actually flag on that as a pattern over the network. So applying Shikata to that communication stream actually makes it a polymorphic communication and covert channel, very difficult to actually detect against. So it works really well. So let's take a look at what the code looks like. So you can see the code here. Is anybody going to detect on that? I can split up this PowerShell, and I do here in a second. I'll show you. But I'm actually never ever calling encoded command, and I'm running encoded command stuff. And I also chunk up, if you see here, let me find that plus sign here. I chunk up the encoded command stuff, so you're doing automatic decoding of base 64 strings. It'll actually chunk it up so you can't actually look at what's actually happening there. So it becomes, different variation length and things like that, and different variable names. So a very easy way to get around traditional detection, because what I'm doing is just string values and converting to strings of encoded command that it never actually puts that on there. So it works really well and easy to evade antivirus out there and anything traditional detection. But you can detect on the length, right? Length is this, or PowerShell is beaconing out to the internet. That's probably a problem. Let's take a look at the macro stuff. The macro stuff's wicked. The fact that we still have macros, too, another thing, right? Still that one business process that ruins the whole company. Okay, that's what I do. Okay, so that's the macro injection. And again, this one isn't even ever even called PowerShell. Notice here, I add them together to get PowerShell. So you don't ever see PowerShell in the actual code itself, and it chunks everything down. And what's nice about this one is it when it runs, it says the document appears to be made from an older version of Microsoft Office. Please have the creator save to a newer and supported format, and then it closes it out after it compromises the machine. So it makes it look like nothing actually happened on the system itself as it goes through and does it, and then just exits the application. So we're like, oh, that's weird. Okay, never mind. So detection becomes hard. So what happens when you have all this great detection and they circumvent that layer? So we have protection, circumvented protection. What happens if you have detection and they circumvent detection? That's where we start getting the really cool stuff around deception. And deception's fun, because this is creating stuff that I would go for as an attacker that are out there. And there's so many cool techniques that you can leverage to go and do deception. One of my favorite techniques today by far is this. And a couple of good ideas, like, create a domain admin account and make it like, legacy mainframe service account, okay? And put in the description of that account, say this password cannot be reset. We know it's a weak password, but we need it for this application. Need to change later, okay? And give it every possible, permission you can possibly imagine. Enterprise admin, domain admin. Make it like the most amazing account that you've ever seen. It's part of every single group you want. This is like the God mode, account in your environment, right? Make that password like 7,000 characters and lock it up in a safe, right? Because you never need that account, right? If you want to make it a little bit more believable, maybe have a scheduled task that runs on a domain controller to log in so it refreshes at times to show that it actually is active. But then what you do is create a honey token. And I'll explain honey tokens here in a minute. But what you can do is, with PowerShell, there's what's called invoke run as. And it uses a API within Windows, set process name W, I think is the API that they call for that. But what it allows you to do is create, if you're familiar with the net only command within Windows, you can do run as and then do net only, and it caches those credentials on that machine. What you can do with honey tokens is create a scheduled task on all your machines and run this PowerShell script. And what it does is it creates a username and a password, but it doesn't actually authenticate to the actual domain, but it stores that password in the clear in memory. So what does that mean? That means when I compromise one machine, and I go to do Mimikatz or extract information from the system itself, there's that domain admin, that's the God mode domain admin. It has all the permissions, it's a legitimate account, but it has a bad password. Now what happens when I go to use that password? Gonna get a failed login attempt, right? Should we ever have a failed login attempt with that account? Ever. That's deception. That's cool stuff that you can do to start tricking us up as attackers, and things that we can use as last lines of defense in our environment to actually go and identify. And so building multiple deception techniques through each phase of attack makes it awesome. It's something that trips me up when I run into it. And it's funny, this is not a pitch at all from our side, but one of our tools that we use for our managed SOC is Vision, and has deception in there. And that's why it's been fun to do all this. I was actually on a pen test the other day, and I saw this. There was a Chronos service account that was building LLM&R. Are you familiar with LLM&R, locally multicast name resolution protocol? If you're not familiar, what multicast is it when you log into your computer, Your computer then beacons out and says, hey, who has file server 1? Who's this server? Who's this server? And as an attacker, if you're running something like Responder or Envy, you can say, hey, I'm that server, connect to me, and it passes the netNTLM v2 hashes, or netNTLM v1, depending on how you're configured, to the machine automatically. It's like getting free credentials over the network. And so I was doing this pen test for this company, and I didn't realize I had my Windows machine up, and I saw that there was this Kronos account that was being run over LLM&R, and it was like, Kronos-DA. Man, I spent like 20 minutes cracking that account, tried to use it, got a failed login attempt, only to realize it was my own machine that got me on my own tool that I wrote the code for, that I put that username in there for, that totally, jacked me up. And I was laughing at myself because it literally burned about an hour of my time, going and doing it. And I detected myself, which was really crummy. But, building those things in actually makes a big difference. If you saw this, the French were prepared. They, the French got a heads up that their president was going to be attacked by nation states. And so they actually created a whole environment around deception. They laid fake information out there, fake infrastructure for them to go and hack, fake documents. They had a whole team dedicated to putting misinformation out there so the hackers would go after these different areas. It worked. They released a bunch of data that was garbage, that had no relevance whatsoever to what they were trying to do and had no impact on the elections as far as we know. And so if you look at our areas to mess with attackers, everything from the intelligence gathering phase, to where they start building their threat models that go after us, to the vulnerability analysis, exploitation, and post-exploitation. We can build deception in to each one of those areas, so we have another layer of defense. And so if you look at like doing fake users on LinkedIn, making them, highly sexy in nature, so that we expose CEOs' email addresses everywhere, and we have them go, the wire transfer frauds go to a different location now instead of our CFO. Those are the things that you can do with deception based off of how they do information gathering. Have somebody monitor those accounts that, when they're trying to send emails, it doesn't, might be something legit, but it should be its own dedicated security program. I think we're at a point now in the industry where, the industry needs to have its own deception vertical in their company that only focuses on the deception pieces of it than just anything else that we're doing. And so if you look at some of the basics, there's things that you can do right now, like randomized ports on every workstation. That's a great example, right? So if someone's port scanning your environment, you have a good idea that they're going after your environment itself. What I like doing is I wrote a tool called Artillery, and a lot of times in your organization you'll have externally facing IP addresses that you're not using, or ports that you're not using. So why not just NAT them to an artillery box with fake ports everywhere, and then when you're getting sweep, just automatically block them and reduce your noise, right? So you're reducing the intelligence gathering phase of most of these things out there, and have it automatically shut and block them. It makes it a lot easier. On the inside, just sit there and listen and wait for those to actually hit. Honeydocs are a good one as well. What's great is with the CIA leaks, we get some cool code. So in Vault 7, they released a technique that you can do a watermark that beacons out and lets you know when that document was opened. So create awesome, cool, password, domain admin password.xls all over your file shares, and have it beacon out to a server. And if you see an indicator from that, it's a good example, right? Those are key examples of being able to do it. And it'll actually beacon out and do that as well. Kerberos tokens and clear text passwords in memory. If you go to github.com/fuzzy security, there's an evoke run as that I talked about that will create that PowerShell script that can do the username and password directly into memory. Really good example from that side. Creds in the clear. There's Ben 10 created one called Invoke Honeycreds, and it will actually send fake LLM&R across your network with usernames and passwords. Now, there's a really cool way of actually detecting this. There's an event log that is called explicit credentials were used to log in. Now, if you use Honeycreds, you can do a randomized username and password that's not legitimate in your domain. Should those credentials ever be used in your environment? No. So if you see explicit credentials were used to log into this remote system, you know you have an attacker's machine in your environment. So a good active hunting exercise that you can actually go and do, or have it run as a scheduled task and report that log out there. Creating user accounts, create a local admin account. Make sure that they're the same name-wise across all your system, and use something like Laps, which is free from Microsoft, and it randomizes all the local admin passwords. And just watch for failed login attempts on those. So with those three concepts around protection, detection, and deception, we got to come up with a cool acronym. PDD doesn't sound cool. I'm trying to rotate those around or something. But with those three concepts, you have a much better chance at stopping attacks both in the early stages of an attack all the way to the very end. And we don't, I think as an industry, we know that Susie in IT and Bob in sales is going to get compromised, right? We don't necessarily care about their one machine. What we want to stop them from doing is getting access and exfilling the data that they need or they're going after out of the company. One person getting hit with ransomware is less of an impact than 500 people getting hit with ransomware, right? And so if we can stop those early warning stages and stop them in the early stages of that breach, we have a much better chance. And those different layers really make a big difference when it comes to what we're seeing out there. The thing is that we need to learn from each other to do this. The industry of deception is getting pretty awesome. There's a lot of good people writing good things like Ben 10 and Fuzzy Security, a lot of the other ones. Deception is something that you can incorporate into your environment now that doesn't have an impact on systems, but creates a whole different level of visibility that you didn't have before in the past. And so, last thing I'll cover with is just make a difference. Write some cool code around deception or detection. Find out a new detection criteria that you're seeing out there. Those are the cool things that you actively get to do. We detected this cool file list persistence methods where they would use PowerShell and MSHTA to use registry keys to maintain persistence in an environment without ever having to touch stuff on the disk. That's cool stuff, right? And we need to share that information and get it out so that people understand how to detect that stuff. Those are the things that we need to do to get better as an industry. And just because I'm on the offense doesn't mean I can't be awesome at defense as well. So with that, thank you very much. If you want the slides, available here. Thank you. And let's give another round of applause for everybody that makes ANYCON possible. The sound, the equipment, the building, everything. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, everybody. Thanks. That's it.